The Court of Common Pleas in Pennsylvania goes back all the way to 1776. But you have to wonder if they've ever had a case more horrific than the capital murder trial of abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell. So a strong viewer warning is in order. The story we're about to tell is grim. The Kermit Gosnell case is a landmark legal battle about race, class, and the reality of abortion in America. But the details are appalling. They're set out in this 281-page grand jury report that summed up its allegations against Gosnell on page 1, paragraph 1. Quote, he regularly and illegally delivered live, viable babies in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy and then murdered these newborns by severing their spinal cords with scissors. Over the years, many people came to know that something was going on here, but no one put a stop to it. Several of Gosnell's employees testified that this happened, and some pleaded guilty to murdering babies. As I speak, a Philadelphia jury has not yet decided the fate of Kermit Gosnell, whose controversial career began a half-century ago at the dawn of the abortion rights movement. Kermit Gosnell was born in Philadelphia in 1941. Raised in a working-class black neighborhood, he was a striver. From his humble beginnings, he'd ultimately go on to graduate from Philadelphia's Jefferson Medical College in 1966. The 60s and early 70s were heady days for a generation pushing social and political change. And Kermit Gosnell, MD, fit right in, says author and Fox News executive editor Peter Boyer.
He was the expression, the ultimate expression, you could argue, of the civil rights movement. But he was also on the edge of an almost radical vein of thought when it came to what he called women's health issues, which became a kind of euphemism for the abortion rights movement.
May 1972. The Supreme Court had heard arguments in an historic abortion case, but it would be months before the actual Roe v. Wade decision. One pro-abortion women's health group dreamed up an outrageous piece of political theater ahead of the court's decision. They reached out to Kermit Gosnell, who had trained at a New York abortion clinic before returning to Philadelphia.
He became consequently involved in this, one of the weirdest and darkest episodes in the abortion rights movement.
An episode that would ultimately become the subject of a U.S. Senate hearing on human experimentation. The story begins in Chicago, where abortion was illegal. The women's group chartered a bus to drive 15 poor, pregnant women in their 2nd trimester to Philadelphia, where abortion law was ambiguous. There, the next day, Mother's Day, Kermit and another doctor performed free abortions on all of them, with TV cameras rolling. The television footage is lost. Only newspaper accounts survived. They report that Gosnell was using something called a supercoil.
The supercoil was an experimental medical device meant to be inserted into the uterus of a woman who was pregnant, and gradually, as the supercoil heated up to body temperature, it would expand and start really lacerating, tearing, cutting, causing bleeding.
Dr. Sidney Wolf, one of Ralph Nader's consumer watchdogs, was appalled by the stunt.
They were never told that this is an experiment. They were never told some of the known dangers about it. Dr. Gosnell's license should have been yanked then. 9 of the 15 women suffered complications. 3 ended up in the hospital. The episode became known as the Mother's Day Massacre. When the Senate held its hearing a year later, Gosnell issued a defiant statement, casting himself as one doctor who actually did something for women's health, rather than just talk about it. Of the Mother's Day abortions, Gosnell wrote, quote, "It would have been irresponsible not to respond to these women." After Roe v. Wade made abortion a constitutional right, Gosnell would make a career out of performing them, even though he was never certified as an obstetrician or gynecologist.
Kermit Gosnell was a failed physician.
Dr. Mark Siegel of the Fox Medical A-Team.
He didn't make it through a residency. You'd be scrambling. You'd be trying to get a career together. What do I do? What do I do? You find a role If it works for you, you keep doing it.
It worked. Before the 70s were over, he'd opened the augustly named Women's Medical Society at 38th Street and Lancaster Avenue in West Philadelphia, complete with the silhouette of a couple swinging a child between them.
The community, the neighbors around the clinic, loved Dr. Gosnell, and they said he was a very respected, upstanding member of their community, and he was known for just his reputation in the community.
Documentarian Jen Thompson made a short film about Gosnell called 3801 Lancaster.
We've had people tell us that if they had a problem, Dr. Gosnell was the one to go to.
But his clinic operated on the shady side from the beginning, suggests Philadelphia District Attorney Seth Williams.
The doctor was not a board-certified obstetrician or gynecologist. They used the name of another physician who was board-certified to open the clinic.
Government health officials, however, didn't seem to care. Prosecutor Ann Ponterio.
We found that the first inspection was done in 1978, and it was good for a year to 1979. The second inspection was not done for 10 years later, to 1989.
When they did inspect, they found significant problems, like not having licensed nurses on staff. But authorities looked the other way.
In 1993 was the last time for the approval. In over 17 years, no one set foot in that clinic, and no one did any annual inspections, and no one went out for any complaints.
The grand jury would learn one reason why that happened: politics. Syndicated columnist and Fox News contributor Kirsten Powers.
Testimony done by a Department of Health top official recounted a meeting under the administration of new Governor Tom Ridge. They decided that they did not want to inspect these abortion clinics because it would be putting up a barrier to access of abortions to women. Governor Ridge's administration was concerned that if they did routine inspections, they would find too many violations.
Meanwhile, Gosnell's clinic became stunningly profitable. Prosecutors estimate he was taking in $15,000 a night, close to $2 million a year in cash. And he kept costs low at his ill-equipped clinic with an untrained staff.
And he had them doing jobs that are for professionals. He had them doing ultrasounds. There was a 15-year-old who was hired to work at the clinic. Dr. Gosnell gave her a science textbook, which she read for 20 minutes, and she became an anesthesiologist.
Another key employee went to a Caribbean medical school, but was never licensed to practice.
There was a doctor who had gone to a school in Grenada, and after the clinic was closed, he became a telemarketer.
Dr. Gosnell wasn't even there during the day. What he would do is he would have these untrained, unlicensed staff monitoring these women, and then he would come there at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and he would have these abortions performed throughout the night till 3 o'clock in the morning.
And that's just the beginning. According to prosecutors in their case against Gosnell, his Women's Medical Society was much worse than an incompetently run clinic. It was a home to butchery and murder, plain and simple. Was Kermit Gosnell a courageous crusader who helped women exercise their reproductive rights? Or an incompetent, unethical doctor who found a niche providing abortions to poor, desperate women with nowhere else to turn?
That was the place to go for your abortion, and you can go without your parents' consent, and if you got pregnant again within 2-3 months, you can go right back. You were going there to take care of business, to handle a situation.
Taisha Hudson says she learned that when she got pregnant at 17 back in the 1990s. She didn't immediately decide to get an abortion, but when Taisha's mother found out, she convinced her.
That's the answer to a young teenage girl finding out that she's pregnant, still in high school, is to terminate the pregnancy.
Though Taisha was almost 3 months pregnant, she took more time to research her options. She said most clinics told her that an abortion at her stage would be too painful to endure without anesthesia.
If you're past that 12 weeks, you could not get an abortion without the anesthesia, and with the anesthesia, it costs more money. So the clinic where Dr. Gosnell was at, that you did not have to worry about that. You can be over a certain amount of weeks and still get the abortion done.
Then Hudson had to come up with Gosnell's $350 fee. By the time she got it, she worried she was so far along that even Gosnell's clinic would make her buy anesthesia. It didn't.
They did the sonogram and they said he basically was just like, oh, you're a little over 12 weeks. And I kind of was like a little over, like in my head, like I was like almost 18 weeks. And they prepped me, no counseling or anything.
As soon as the procedure began, Hudson knew the clinic had done her no favor.
I literally felt like a part of my insides like ripped. I even remember just asking them, like, do I supposed to be in this much pain? I felt like something was like ripping, like literally like ripping inside of me.
That's almost like torture.
Dr. Manny Alvarez is a respected OBGYN and a member of the Fox News medical A team.
People were giving the option of pain for how much pain-free status they wanted to be in. I mean, imagine taking your appendix without anesthesia, or telling somebody that, well, we'll take your appendix, but how much anesthesia you were willing to pay for.
And there was other cause for alarm. In the mid-90s, a pediatrician who practiced nearby noticed something troubling. Philadelphia prosecutor Ann Ponteria.
He had seen young girls and women who had gone to the clinic come back with venereal diseases. Dr. Gosnell was reusing the instruments. The bloody instruments were being inserted from one woman to the next, and therefore the possibility of infection was uncontrollable.
Pennsylvania health officials received this complaint and dozens of others through the decades. Complaints filed by patients Gosnell harmed because, again, prosecutors say no state inspector set foot in his clinic for years. If state officials had done their job, would a young mother of two, her name Shamika Shaw, still be alive? According to the grand jury report, Shaw died due to a botched late-term abortion by Gosnell in 2000.
He basically cut her in pieces. Her uterus was perforated. Part of the placenta was left in her womb. He butchered her.
Margot Davidson is Shamika's cousin and a Pennsylvania state representative. She says after Shamika's cousins took her home, her condition worsened.
He told her and her other fellow cousins in her same age group not to call if there was a problem because it would be trouble for them. She was rolling on the floor. She was screaming. She was crying. She was gasping for air, and she was bleeding profusely. They were afraid to call the clinic. They finally did call the clinic and got no answer, no call back. Finally, her mother came home and took her to the hospital where she was pronounced dead.
Shaw's family sued and said they were stonewalled by state officials.
Again, the attorney asked the Department of Health, please give us anything that you can about this facility. And the reply this time was, it's not that we can't give it to you. There are no complaints.
The Department of Health's top attorney, their general counsel, when asked about why they did not follow up on these complaints, her answer was, and I quote, people die.
The Department of Public Health once again failed the community, failed my cousin.
The Shaws settled their lawsuit for $900,000, one of at least 5 Gosnell malpractice cases resulting in $1.7 million in payoffs. In 2001, one of Gosnell's staffers tried to blow the whistle on him by calling the Pennsylvania Secretary of State, prosecutor Mariana Sorensen.
Her name was Marcella Stanley Chung, and she was one of these unlicensed workers who was treated like a doctor. She was put in charge of doing ultrasounds, anesthetizing the patients. She was nervous that she was going to kill a woman, and she told them everything they needed to know to shut this man down forever.
But all that got shut down, she said, was the investigation.
It was closed by the Department of State prosecutor saying prosecution not warranted.
But the word about Gosnell was getting out, prosecutors say, and that was hurting his business.
He could not get the referrals. He didn't get many first trimester patients anymore, and so he changed his model by going with the more expensive late-term and illegal abortions.
Many people knew along the Atlantic seaboard that if you could not get a late-term abortion anywhere else, you could go to the Women's Medical Society, run by Dr. Gosnell, and if you could pay, you could get a late-term abortion.
Even if you're more than 24 weeks pregnant, though those abortions are illegal in Pennsylvania and many other states. Legal or not, Dr. Manny Alvarez says late-term abortions are complicated and dangerous.
Many things can go wrong. The chances of bleeding are tremendous. The other complication is the mechanics of removing a fetus at 24 weeks. You run the chance of perforating the uterus. You have issues of infection. You have to have the skills. You have to have the infrastructure. You have to have the healthcare personnel. For people to be doing this out of a so-called little private office, it's really, there's no words to describe the crime.
Unlike the a la carte pricing for anesthesia in short-term abortions, Gosnell insisted that late-term patients be very heavily sedated, according to grand jury testimony.
What Dr. Gosnell didn't like, he didn't like anybody who was loud because he didn't want to attract the police. So what he would do is he would tell these women to med him up, M-E-D-E-M up, med him up.
41-year-old Karnamaya Mangar was a mother of 3, grandmother of 1, and 18 weeks pregnant. 4 months earlier, she had moved to Virginia from Nepal. She wanted to end her pregnancy. 3 local clinics would not perform the abortion, but one referred her to the Women's Medical Society. On November 18, 2009, her friend and her daughter drove her to Gosnell's clinic.
Cytotec is only supposed to be given maybe once every 3 hours. This medication was given to Karnamaya Mangar every hour on the hour. And she was also given another drug called Restorol, and that's to induce sleepiness. She was given Demerol dose after Demerol dose after Demerol dose.
Mangar was a small woman, but Gosnell's 2 unlicensed helpers, Linda Williams and Sherry West, who would later be charged with murder, did not adjust the medication to Mangar's size.
She lost all of her vital signs. She stopped breathing.
According to grand jury testimony, when Gosnell could not revive her, he went into cover-up mode. He didn't call the ambulance for hours and didn't tell the paramedics about the heavy doses of Demerol. And when they did get a pulse, Gosnell couldn't find the keys to the padlocked emergency exit.
Ms. Mangar's survival chances, slim as they were severely hampered by the fact it took the paramedics 20 minutes getting the door open.
Mangar was pronounced dead at the hospital. Even after all that, the health department declined to send investigators to the clinic. And Ponterio says if they had, they might have made yet another shocking discovery. Evidence of the Gosnell Clinic's most horrifying practice of all.
Dr. Gosnell wasn't even performing abortion procedures. These babies were born, and they were born alive, and they were killed.
When Fox News reporting continues after the break. Those injuries, those deaths, all unintentional. Not so, witnesses say, in the case of babies born alive in the clinic.
He was inducing labor, and he was having these women deliver babies and deliver fetuses.
The witnesses testified that the means by which these babies' lives were taken wasn't a traditional type of abortion procedure. They were drugged up, birth would be induced, and once the baby left the mother's body, taking its first breath, at that point, that's how this doctor elected to kill these babies.
He had a process that he referred to as snipping, that the children would be born alive, and that they would then take scissors and place them at the base of the skull and snip or sever the spinal cord of those children that were born alive.
This is a very, very painful thing. And some of these babies did not die immediately.
Those aren't botched abortions, that's homicide.
And the reason he was doing this is because he had 46 lawsuits and he was paying out money for women who were maimed and mutilated. And it was easier to deliver a baby rather than go in there and extract it himself.
The grand jury heard about that from Steve Massoff, a Grenada med school grad who worked as Gosnell's $300 a week unlicensed medical resident.
Well, the fetus would precipitate.
What do you mean?
Oh, come right out. I'd have to go and tend to that patient.
What would you do?
I'd make sure that when, if the fetus precipitated, the cord was cut. Also a standard procedure, the cervical spine was cut.
How often did this happen?
Many times more than I really care to remember. I would have to say every week it would happen to at least 50% of the patients.
There was testimony given to the grand jury that this process of snipping happened hundreds of times.
One of Gosnell's assistants, Karima Cross, testified that at one point Gosnell told her the law had changed and he couldn't snip babies' necks anymore. So Gosnell tried injecting a drug called digoxin into the fetus's heart to kill it in the womb. But Gosnell couldn't do it right, Cross testified.
He tried to do the needle in the stomach, and that's what was supposed to have killed the baby before the baby came out. But if it didn't, he'll say, oh, well, the law says that I can do it. I can still slit the baby's neck because it didn't work. The needle didn't work.
According to Cross and others, the needle never worked. So, the grand jury found Gosnell stopped trying it altogether and reverted to his old system of killing babies after they were born.
I think there's a lot of evidence here that it didn't matter to this doctor one bit whether he killed the fetus inside the womb or outside the womb. As a matter of fact, it was clear that in his late-term abortions, he was using medications to dope up the patient and try to get the baby out and then kill it outside the womb.
The babies allegedly born alive never got names. The grand jury would refer to some by letters, starting with baby boy A.
Baby boy A is born, and they are so alarmed at the size and the development, all the features, all the body parts. They took photographs because they were horrified. This was something that was terribly wrong, what was happening there, and they knew it.
Gosnell's sonogram records say the mother was 29.4 weeks pregnant. That's well beyond the legal limit for an abortion in Pennsylvania. But a prosecution expert who looked at the pictures concluded that baby boy A was at least 32 weeks in the womb.
A 30-week fetus has an over 80% chance of surviving. I have delivered babies at 24 weeks, and now they come and see me, and they're high school students, and, you know, so 30 weeks, come on.
Karima Cross told the grand jury that baby boy A was breathing when she saw Dr. Gosnell, quote, just slit its neck and then put the body in a shoebox too small to hold him.
One of the most shocking and horrifying aspects was the testimony that Dr. Gosnell stated that this baby boy was big enough to walk him to the bus stop.
The body of baby boy B would be found in Gosnell's freezer.
Baby boy B is 28 weeks old, at an age when babies can feel, found frozen in a water bottle with evidence of the spine being snipped from behind. The vertebrae penetrated, something that would cause great pain.
And there was only one defect, as the medical examiner testified, out of this beautiful baby boy you saw there in the photo. And it was the slit to the back of the neck. And the testimony was that scissors were put through and perforated through that area to cut the spinal cord and kill the baby.
Based on the grand jury report, not all the killing was done by Gosnell himself. Cross testified she witnessed Linda Williams, another unlicensed Gosnell assistant, murder a baby, baby C, who had been breathing and moving for 20 minutes.
Williams called Cross over to take a look at the baby. And when Ms. Cross was asked, why do you think Ms. Williams killed this baby that was alive, that was breathing, that was moving for 20 minutes? She said, I guess because she had seen Dr. Gosnell do it so many times.
Some deliveries did not happen on an operating table.
There were women who, because they were given so much medications, they were going to the bathroom and they would deliver babies into the toilet.
In the later stages of a pregnancy, the only thing holding the baby in place is often a tight cervix. But a drug like Cytotec, when it's administered, relaxes the cervix. So a woman could be literally sitting in the bathroom and deliver a baby. That's a live birth.
When baby D, 10 to 15 inches long, was delivered in a toilet, Gosnell's assistant, Adrian Moten, took over.
Moten reached in where this little baby, swimming trying to save its own life and get out of the toilet, grabbed the baby and slit its neck.
Moten has admitted to killing live babies, quote, a good 10 times. According to testimony, others just watched and did nothing.
Baby E is a baby that Ashley Baldwin, one of the witnesses, testified that she saw in the procedure room. She heard the baby whining, making crying noises. The baby was alive. When the doctor came out of the room, the baby was dead. She saw the baby thrown in the trash like garbage by Dr. Gosnell.
Have you ever seen a horror movie where you hear a baby crying in a room and the murderer goes into the room and then the baby stops crying? That's baby E.
Massoff testified he personally cut the necks of multiple babies and assisted when Gosnell snipped the necks of live babies F and G. Baby G is the last murder victim named by the grand jury, but the panel believes Gosnell killed many more babies outside the sight of his compliant staff.
We know that Dr. Gosnell would perform the latest of late-term abortions on Sundays when none of his other staff members were present, when only he and his wife would come into the clinic. And we really have no way of accurately determining beyond a reasonable doubt how many children met their demise as a result of these Sunday late-term abortions.
Despite Gosnell's alleged steps to avoid detection, it's hard to believe that sooner or later his enterprise would not be found out. But it took 31 years, and not for the reason you'd think. That story, when we... The truth is, it wasn't the abortions that finished Dr. Kermit Gosnell's career. It was the drugs. His clinic was an abortion mill at night, but authorities say Dr. Gosnell was up to no good during the day as well. They raided the clinic because they believed it was a pill mill that illegally sold prescriptions for powerful painkillers and other medicines.
The search was a culmination of an investigation into a massive, illegal drug-selling operation involving prescriptions for OxyContin and other narcotics.
The FBI and the DEA led the raid on February 18, 2010.
They thought that they would just find a normal clinic that allowed this doctor to make so much money and for so many people to get illegal prescriptions for narcotics. What they discovered was a horrific, it's almost out of one of the worst movies or horror novels that you could imagine.
Officials from the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Department of State came along. According to the grand jury report, it was their first visit to the clinic in more than 15 years.
Instead of just seeing pills, they saw blood. Blood-stained walls, urine on the walls, feces, infestation.
They found medical waste bags just strewn everywhere in this clinic. They also found a refrigerator where the employees kept their lunch, but that also had bags filled with fetal remains. They found jar after jar after jar filled with fetal remains, and specifically severed feet in jars.
It just completely overwhelming. You just don't know how to process something like that.
At age 16, Desiree Manning, now Desiree Hawkins of West Virginia, went to Gosnell's abortion clinic in 2009. She learned just this year that he had cut off the foot of her child and saved it. Hawkins also learned that Gosnell lied to her about the age of her baby. He said she was far less than 21 weeks.
I was actually 23 weeks and 4 days. I had already considered there's a possibility that he sent my kid.
The grand jury found that investigators recovered the remains of 45 fetuses and that Gosnell admitted to a detective that 10 to 20% were probably older than 24 weeks, the legal cutoff. Baby boy B was one of two the prosecution claims were medically confirmed to have been viable. They also found women, dazed women.
They were almost stuporous. These women were jammed into a room where they're all there together. Some of them were bleeding. And so the Department of Health, they called and told the detectives call for an ambulance.
At the same time, they searched Gosnell's house and found patient files, almost $250,000 in cash, and a gun. The state and local authorities that had ignored Gosnell's abortion mill for more than a generation now swung into action. February 22, 2010, the Board of Medicine suspended Gosnell's medical license. March 12th, the Department of Health began the process of shutting down the clinic. May 4th, the Philadelphia DA submitted the case to a grand jury. For more than 6 months, the grand jury reviewed thousands of pieces of evidence and heard testimony from 58 witnesses before releasing a 281-page report.
The presentment charges one count of third-degree murder against Gosnell and his associates for killing Karnamaya Mangar, and 7 counts of first-degree murder for the intentional killing of viable babies born alive.
Though the DA charged Gosnell with only 7 murders, if the allegations of the grand jury are true, he could be guilty of hundreds of premeditated killings, more than any American mass murderer or serial killer. The prosecution filed notice that it might seek the death penalty.
I really haven't seen a great deal of the publicity because I've lived through negative publicity before.
Gosnell insisted he was innocent of any crimes.
If you're not making mistakes, you're not really attempting to do something. So I think that my patients are aware that I do my very best by them.
And it was as if he was saying, that's my job, you know. I'm being charged with killing these babies, that's why they came to me.
9 of Gosnell's employees were also charged. 3 pleaded guilty to an assortment of crimes: perjury, racketeering, corrupting a minor, and conspiracy. Sherry West pleaded guilty to third-degree murder in the death of Karnamaya Mangar. 3 others pleaded guilty to third-degree murder in the deaths of babies born alive. Stephen Massoff admitted he assisted in the snipping of the necks of baby F and baby G after they were born alive. To avoid life in prison or even the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to, among other charges, third-degree murder. Linda Williams admitted she snipped baby C's neck after the infant was born alive. She also pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. Adrian Moten, who snipped the neck of baby D, pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and other charges. Finally, Pearl Gosnell, Dr. Gosnell's wife, pleaded guilty to illegal late-term abortion and conspiracy. She would not testify against her husband. The others would testify at trial to what they saw and what they did. Horrible crimes, no longer alleged, but admitted.
Actual people that worked under the employ of Dr. Kermit Gosnell admitted that they murdered babies as part of the regular routine practice of what was going on in that shop of horrors. So this isn't speculation. This isn't a theory by the prosecution. This is real, and it's murder.
The remaining question was whether a jury would find Gosnell himself guilty of any of the killings. He pleaded not guilty to murder and a long list of lesser charges that included infanticide, conspiracy, illegal late-term abortions. His employee, Eileen O'Neill, would stand trial with him on charges of theft by deception and racketeering. In early March, a 17-member jury was impaneled, including alternates. There were 8 men and 9 women. In his opening argument, Gosnell's attorney, Jack McMahon, told them the case was a, quote, prosecutorial lynching, And, referring to Gosnell, quote, "This black man is being taken because of who he is and where he works." McMahon said Gosnell's clinic had a lower than average complication rate and repeat business as well. And he said the prosecution was elitist. Quote, "They want to put Mayo Clinic standards on a West Philadelphia clinic." Explosive charges. Would the jury be convinced? Fox News reporting continues. Returning to our story, the jury's heard how the lawyers framed the Kermit Gosnell case. The prosecution says the abortion doctor is a murderer who made a practice of delivering live babies, then killing them in cold blood. The defense says it's a racist prosecution of an inner city doctor doing his best for poor women with nowhere else to turn. Now the jury would hear from people who actually worked in the clinic, what they saw and what they did. March 18th began a 5-week parade of witnesses for the prosecution. To Peter Boyer, the trial testimony lent a new dimension to the horrifying allegations of the grand jury report.
The first employee to testify at the trial was Adrienne Moten. She told the court that she had snipped the spines of 10 babies who had been born alive. She did these things and was asked, "Was that murder? Did you consider it wrong?" And she said, "You know, at first I didn't."
The testimony captured for Boyer with the German philosopher Hannah Arendt talking about the Holocaust called the banality of evil.
There was another employee who gave testimony, a young woman named Linda Williams. She talked about the snipping of the spinal cord, and she was asked, "Did you have any awareness that this was murder?" And she told the jury, "I only do what I'm told to do. What I was told to do was snip their neck."
This was some of the most horrifying testimony that I ever sat through in a courtroom.
Kimberly Guilfoyle is a former sex crime prosecutor.
I looked into the eyes of those jurors. I'm wondering how they're ever going to be able to get this out of their heads, because these photos are blown up of these big, full-term, almost essentially babies, and you see life there.
In cross-examination, Gosnell's lawyer, Jack McMahon, tried to undermine the prosecution's case, count by count. He painted some witnesses as disgruntled employees. He suggested the prosecution used threats of the death penalty and long prison terms to get clinic workers to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. He said all the babies Gosnell's charged with killing were already dead, or at best doomed, because he'd injected them with a drug to stop their hearts. And he scored his biggest point during the testimony about baby boy B, a baby the prosecution alleges who was born alive at 28 weeks, then killed by Gosnell and placed in his freezer.
The defense attorney, Mr. McMahon, got up, and he has a very booming voice, and he moved around and circled right in front of the jury to show that he wasn't afraid of the evidence, that he had seen the photos too. And he questioned the chief medical examiner and asked him, "Can you say with a reasonable degree of medical certainty that this baby was born alive?" And the witness said, "No, I cannot."
With that testimony on a defense motion, the judge himself acquitted Gosnell of the murder of baby boy B. He also threw out the murder charges relating to babies F and G. The judge did not explain his ruling, but Fox News medical expert Dr. Mark Siegel says the judge is wrong if he based his ruling on the fact that those babies had been observed moving, but not necessarily breathing.
There may be some debate about whether life begins at conception, but I'll tell you what there's no debate about. If a baby is born and you need to use a respirator to get that baby breathing, that's life. That's a viable life.
Either way, the defense had knocked out 3 of the 7 capital murder charges against Gosnell before it even began presenting its case. That was scheduled to begin Wednesday, April 24th. But when court went into session that morning, another bombshell. The defense rested without calling a single witness. No medical experts, no clinic employees, no satisfied patients, no Gosnell himself. It was a high-risk move. Kermit Gosnell's attorney was gambling the doctor's life on a closing argument. A closing argument that would reignite the explosive charges made at the outset of the trial, that his client was the victim of a racist, elitist prosecutor who refused to acknowledge the realities of abortion in America. After the break.
It's for your scalp.
More than 2 years since the allegations were leveled at Dr. Kermit Gosnell, and nearly 2 months since his trial started. It was time to finally come to terms with what did or did not happen in his West Philadelphia abortion clinic, for the jury and for the nation as well. When Kermit Gosnell's trial started, something odd happened, or to be more precise, didn't happen. The seats reserved for the media were empty.
We have a mainstream media that typically likes to cover any issues related to reproductive rights or abortion very thoroughly, but generally this trial was ignored.
Columnist and political commentator Kirsten Powers, a Fox News contributor, was appalled and wrote a USA Today piece saying so.
You would have had to have been following either activist blogs on the right or the left, or the local Philadelphia news if you'd wanted to know anything about this.
Trial of abortion Dr. Kermit Gosnell.
In the same way that there are very serious policy implications when there's a mass shooting like what we saw in Newtown, there are very serious implications about what happened at this abortion clinic. So I was quite shocked that I had not heard anything about this.
With so little press attention, most Americans had never heard of the Gosnell case, according to a Fox News poll. Of those who were following the trial, a majority attributed the lack of national news coverage to media bias. Far fewer figured it was just a local story or too gruesome to tell. Anti-abortion leaders say if Americans know what happened in Gosnell's clinic, many more would oppose legalized abortion. But some pro-choicers believe just the opposite.
I'm happy to see this story given play because of what I think it teaches us about where America is and how much harm our policies are doing to women.
Pennsylvania State Senator Dalen Leach thinks if Americans know what happened in Gosnell's clinic, they will be more likely to support policies that will give poor women more access to better abortion services.
No one is defending what Gosnell did. No one's defending his practices. No one is defending that conduct.
But Gosnell lawyers would offer a defense of what they say their client really did in his clinic. And the jury would hear it during the trial's closing argument. The media would hear it too. For it's worth noting that when Jack McMahon, Gosnell's defense lawyer, stood up to speak, the press section of the courtroom was packed. Fox News editor-at-large Peter Boyer was there.
Gosnell's attorney asserted once again that it was an elitist and racist prosecution. He said that his client had been singled out because he was an African American providing abortion services in an urban community.
But he did a lot more than just play the race card.
Dr. Gosnell's attorney told the jury, "You're not here to decide whether or not abortion is pretty. It's not pretty. It's bloody. It's real." In a way, it was almost like that Jack Nicholson scene in A Few Good Men. He was saying, this is abortion. This is what an abortion clinic looks like. I'm providing services to poor people, and you can't handle the truth.
The prosecution then painstakingly went through its case against Gosnell one more time. More than 250 criminal counts. Racketeering, performing abortions without a waiting period, performing illegal late-term abortions, third-degree murder of Karnamaya Mongar, and in the deaths of baby boy A and babies C, D, and E, 4 counts of murder in the first degree. A grim catalog of innocent life callously terminated as a matter of routine. The judge reminded the jurors that their duty was to discover the truth, and they began their deliberations. In their hands, the life of Dr. Kermit Gosnell, and, it might be said, the conscience of a nation. Wednesday passed, no verdict. Thursday, no verdict. The deliberations continue. Regardless of your view of Gosnell himself, this trial had by the end become less about the fate of one man and more about a turning point in the most enduring and emotional debate in recent American history. Whether you're pro-life, pro-choice, or simply not sure, the case of Kermit Gosnell provides our society with a reality check. Gosnell's abortion clinic did exist under the benign neglect of the authorities. How did this happen? How should we go forward? This case won't be the end of the abortion debate, but it may help clarify it. That's our show for tonight. I'm Brett Baer. Thanks for watching. Fox. They reached out to Kermit Gosnell, who had trained at a New York abortion clinic before returning to Philadelphia.
He became consequently involved in this, one of the weirdest and darkest episodes in the abortion rights movement.
An episode that would ultimately become the subject of a U.S. Senate hearing on human experimentation. The story begins in Chicago, where abortion was illegal. The women's group chartered a bus to drive 15 poor, pregnant women in their second trimester to Philadelphia, where abortion law was ambiguous. There, the next day, Mother's Day, Kermit and another doctor performed free abortions on all of them, with TV cameras rolling. The television footage is lost. Only newspaper accounts survived. They report that Gosnell was using something called a supercoil.
The supercoil was an experimental medical device meant to be inserted into the uterus of a woman who was pregnant, and gradually, as the supercoil heated up to body temperature, it would expand and start really lasting.
The Court of Common Pleas in Pennsylvania goes back all the way to 1776. But you have to wonder if they've ever had a case more horrific than the capital murder trial of abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell. So a strong viewer warning is in order. The story we're about to tell is grim. The Kermit Gosnell case is a landmark legal battle about race, class, and the reality of abortion in America. But the details are appalling. They're set out in this 281-page grand jury report that summed up its allegations against Gosnell on page 1, paragraph 1. Quote, he regularly and illegally delivered live, viable babies in the third trimester of pregnancy and then murdered these newborns by severing their spinal cords with scissors. Over the years, many people came to know that something was going on here, but no one put a stop to it. Several of Gosnell's employees testified that this happened, and some pleaded guilty to murdering babies. As I speak, a Philadelphia jury has not yet decided the fate of Kermit Gosnell, whose controversial career began a half-century ago at the dawn of the abortion rights movement. Kermit Gosnell was born in Philadelphia in 1941. Raised in a working-class black neighborhood, he was a striver. From his humble beginnings, he'd ultimately go on to graduate from Philadelphia's Jefferson Medical College in 1966. The 60s and early 70s were heady days for a generation pushing social and political change. And Kermit Gosnell, MD, fit right in, says author and Fox News executive editor Peter Boyer.
He was the expression, the ultimate expression, you could argue, of the civil rights movement, but he was also on the edge of an almost radical vein of thought when it came to what he called women's health issues, which became a kind of euphemism for the abortion rights movement.
May 1972. The Supreme Court had heard arguments in an historic abortion case, but it would be months before the actual Roe v. Wade decision. One pro-abortion women's health group dreamed up an outrageous piece of political theater ahead of the court's decision.
Lacerating, tearing, cutting, causing bleeding.
Dr. Sidney Wolf, one of Ralph Nader's consumer watchdogs, was appalled by the stunt.
They were never told that this is an experiment. They were never told some of the known dangers about it. Dr. Gosnell's license should have been yanked then.
9 of the 15 women suffered complications. 3 ended up in the hospital. The episode became known as the Mother's Day Massacre. When the Senate held its hearing a year later, Gosnell issued a defiant statement casting himself as one doctor who actually did something for women's health, rather than just talk about it. Of the Mother's Day abortions, Gosnell wrote, quote, "It would have been irresponsible not to respond to these women." After Roe v. Wade made abortion a constitutional right, Gosnell would make a career out of performing them, even though he was never certified as an obstetrician or gynecologist.
Kermit Gosnell was a failed physician.
Dr. Mark Siegel of the Fox Medical A-Team.
He didn't make it through a residency. You'd be scrambling. You'd be trying to get a career together. What do I do? What do I do? You find a role. If it works for you, you keep doing it.
It worked. Before the 70s were over, he'd opened the augustly named Women's Medical Society at 38th Street and Lancaster Avenue in West Philadelphia, complete with the silhouette of a couple swinging a child between them.
The community, the neighbors around the clinic, loved Dr. Gosnell, and they said he was very respected, upstanding member of their community, and he was known for just his reputation in the community.
Documentarian Jen Thompson made a short film about Gosnell called 3801 Lancaster.
We've had people tell us that if they had a problem, Dr. Gosnell was the one to go to.
But his clinic operated on the shady side from the beginning, suggests Philadelphia District Attorney Seth Williams.
The doctor was not a board-certified obstetrician or gynecologist. They used the name of another physician who was board-certified to open the clinic.
Government health officials, however, didn't seem to care. Prosecutor Ann Ponterio.
We found that the first inspection was done in 1978, and it was good for a year to 1979. The second inspection was not done for 10 years later,